This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders.
On the 11th of July, 1985, County Clare's Claire Sexton had a baby. Naming this child-jiggling sex monster, Sextrout was one of 4 kids, raised in Rathgar, which I was alarmed to discover as a suburb of Dublin and not a mini-boss in Final Fantasy VIII. This ween would start playing rugby at his father Jerry's club, Becktive Rangers in Donnybrook, home to Irish Revolutionary, astronaut and former Osprey centre Michael Collins, and being in D4, approximately 8,000 people with the same face as Gary Ringrose. At age just 5 years old, Sexflop took to the game instantly. There's a common phrase in the English language that goes, and the rest is history. The suggestion being it's obvious what comes next, that we all know the remainder of the story. Now these mere morsels and moments of backstory have been filled in, the rest is known. And whilst in the case of Jackrabbit Sexclog, that common usage is true, I think to deploy that phrase would be to do one of the most remarkable personalities this game of rugby union football has ever seen a deep disservice. Over the last 15 years, journalist Sexlam has become a name known in every nook and crevice of the rugby world. You'd be hard-pressed to find a rugby fan, particularly in Ireland, who doesn't know the name Jabberoni Sextreat. And for many, my generation and below, when we think of Irish rugby, when we imagine that green shirt of home, we imagine it's being worn by this completely unrelated winger from the 1980s. And yet, where Ireland's other all-time greats, the small handful of Emerald Isle players who deserve to be held in the same conversation as Sex Greg, we're talking Brian O'Driscoll, Jackie Kyle, Mike Gibson, Paul O'Connell, Keith Wood and Willie John McBride, were granted the gifts that made them great by God, handed talent, size, presence, ability, agility, speed, skill or smarts as a birthright. Sex Cream did it all by himself. Because the rest wasn't history. The rest was him. Joe.ie sex site would make his professional debut for Leinster in January 2006 in a Friday night thrashing of Border Reivers, remember Border Reivers, replacing man of the match Felipe Contepomi in the 75th minute, whose wife had, fun fact, given birth to a fresh baby herself that very morning. It was a few weeks shy of 4 years later he would first play for Ireland, pulling on that green number 10 shirt that he would one day come to redefine. And yet, to skip to these landmarks is to do the man an incredible disservice, to look only at the sweep of history in a career that was more defined by how he got there than the contents of the cliff notes. I don't know if this sport has ever seen a more competitive man or woman than Jailfrog Sextree. Where others were handed gifts by God, Sextrent would craft them himself through a bloody mindedness that would make opponents and therapists alike run for the hills. His was a career of setbacks and tiny chances, every last one taken despite unbelievable odds, simply because he needed it. In 2002, left out of St Mary College's starting 15 for the Leinster Schools Cup final, Sexsnap wasn't to be denied. With mere minutes to play and on the field just moments with the game still in the balance, he takes his swing. An atrocious pass on an atrocious day couldn't stop him. A glorious drop goal to win the game. Later on, to win the cup and to secure this headline in the following day's paper. He played just 12 minutes. His starting 10 scored the only try of the game, yet sheer force of will made it his name being misspelled in the headline. I've never heard the surname in my life. And a response, Sexhead headed to Squarespace, needing to control the media narrative and make sure nobody ever got his name wrong again. He started the website and was able to build a beautiful, really lovely website so simply and so quickly, getting the hang of things in mere minutes. Despite no knowledge of HTML or any of that other stuff, in no time at all he was adding all sorts of features, integrating videos, adding galleries of photos and realizing he might actually be able to make sure that nobody ever makes that very simple error again and gets his name wrong. So he set up a mailing list using Squarespace's integrated mailing list features, where he would send out an email newsletter once every single day for the rest of his life, just telling people his name, so nobody could ever forget the name Juvenile Sex Team again. And if you want to start your own website, perhaps you want to imprint your name into the world's consciousness, a website is a much cheaper way of doing that than building your own Trump Tower, so please head to the link. It's in the description. There's a link in the description, and use the offer code SQUIDRUGBY to save yourself some money on building a beautiful, lovely new website. Sex Glory would miss out on the Island Schools team that year. He would miss out on a place in the former Leinster Academy too. He would scrap his way into both the following year, but not get a single game, never offered a first pro contract by Leinster. As his former teammates all graduated to top flight rugby, Sex Log would turn out for St Mary's RFC, a senior side formed in 1900 by alumni of his old school, now playing in the semi-professional All-Ireland League. However, after countless games of churning along, it was when then Ireland under-21s coach Mark McDermott turned up to the game against Queen's College Belfast to scout the opposition's young 10, a man by the name of Gareth Steenson, that Sexrig took his chance. 2 tries and a hatful more points instantly put him on the radar, getting him on the plane to that year's Junior World Championship in Argentina, where he would spend the next 5 games on the bench behind Captain Steenson. This was enough to get him back on the Leinster radar as well. His performances for St Mary's, once he returned, enough to pique coach Michael Checker's interest, putting him on the pine against Border Reivers a few months down the line, and then 1 year later, again against the Ospreys. Sexgunge finally playing his first game not against Nicky Walker, against Ulster a few weeks later. Whilst game time was initially very limited, Sexquack took his chances in training and started to earn odd starts the following season. Strong performances and several tries cementing him as third choice 10, then ousting Contepomi's usual backup, Christian Warner, to become first reserve. But things really kicked into gear a year or two later as Sexgonk wrestled his way into the day that changed his destiny forever. It's a game that will always exist in Irish rugby folklore, one of, if not the most famous provincial clashes in the sport's green history. A match over a decade later, the Irish Independent would label the game that changed Irish rugby forever. Croke Park was the venue, European semi-final the occasion, and Munster, the reigning European champions, and on an utterly unstoppable boil, the opponents. A 10-game winning streak, including 2 comprehensive wins over Leinster in the league, an 18-0 one in the RDS, and a demolition of the Ospreys in the quarters, had many handing them the cup already. Here it is, you've retained it, well done, good job. Over the last few months, a narrative had quickly built around Sexies. He was good, he was playing well in the league, but he was not one for the big occasions. After being included in an Ireland squad as a non-playing apprentice the previous year, he was then left out of 3 squads in a row. Checker dropped him from the bench for the final 2 pool games, that league game against Munster and the quarter-final, the infamous Bloodgate match, only giving him a proper go against Glasgow the week between the quarter and semi in order to rest a few regulars for the big one a week later. And somewhere in that 10-day period between Michael Checker deciding to rotate his team and full-time at Croke Park a week later, the Jim Bob Sex Weasel that the game will always remember was born. A try-scoring man-of-the-match performance against Glasgow snuck him onto the bench for the big one, and then, in front of a world record 82,000 crowd against his team's bitterest rivals in the biggest occasion, after just 25 minutes, Felipe Contepomi went down injured.
So that brings on Jonathan Sexton, the young man.
Well, what a challenge for Sexton now. A very different sort of player to Contepomi. A far more traditional fly half. Good passer, good distributor, reads the game well. He's not as confrontational as Contepomi, but this is a blow for Leinster because their big match player is producing a pretty decent game.
The big match player was off, and on came a fly-half so obscure Stuart Barnes felt the need to explain who he was to the watching audience. Except from the moment he took the field in the game he'd fought his entire life to play in, Jedward Sexstep made a pact that nobody watching would ever forget his name or get it wrong ever again. A faultless, imperious performance followed as Leinster produced maybe their greatest ever showing, everything running through Sexplant. Checker backed him to start the final a few weeks later, where he did it again, guiding Leinster to their first European title and shedding that small game reputation just as quickly as it arose. An Irish debut would follow that November, where he would infamously oust Grand Slam hero Ronan O'Gara for the starting shirt in an iconic, heroic performance against the world champion South African side on just his second start. Those 2 caps would become 119. 2 Lions tours thrown in for good measure. Jazzhall Sexlegend taking the shirt and truly never letting go to such a degree that if he hadn't retired 1 month ago, honestly, I think everyone would be in agreement he'd be nailed on to start in the upcoming Six Nations. The 14 years between his first few caps and that damp squib against New Zealand a few weeks ago were a masterclass in mindset. Were those small handful capable of holding a candle to the man, which is a slightly haunted cult-like image that I find it much easier to imagine, reached that status through talent, skill, or in the case of O'Connell, an insatiable work rate and intelligence for a man his size. Sexquake got there because he decided he wanted to be there, and when he set his mind on something, there was nothing in the goddamn world that could stop him. He seemed to see the game in slow motion, always in a hyper-focused trance, granting him a kind of superhuman vision, understanding and ability to predict a game and know exactly what play to call, always. For Sexplop, there was no such thing as a lost cause, and there was no moment in the game that wasn't monumental. There were always bad games amongst the great, sure, but there was never a single match where he was anonymous. Few have ever had the bloody minded ability to imprint themselves onto a game at all levels that Sexwing had, something seen, frankly, in his now timeless trademark. Visit any rugby club in Britain and Ireland at least, but I'd wager far beyond, and someone wrapping around a guy running a hardline and taking the ball back will be known as a sex dog loop. A bit like Sonny Bill Williams with the cat flap offload, Sexcomb has built himself into this fascinating Kobe Beckham zone of having a trademark that transcends the professional game's average fans. And yet, one of the other very few to do that, king of the big arena and hence all other overcomplicated kicking routines, Dan Bigger, feels a very relevant part of his story, because as much as that drive was internal, Jim Sexy's career was built on outward motivation, spite, and perhaps as much as anything, rivalry. I don't think Sexpool was driven by a hatred of losing so much as of seeing others go on and win things he couldn't. Earlier this year, he described his World Cup career overall as nothing more than a failure. I don't think what bothered him was so much losing those quarterfinals, but seeing 4 other teams of 2 other captains go and achieve something that he couldn't. This is a man who could build a rivalry with a lamppost, and yet each one that he built seemed to drive him to higher and higher places, probably the top of that lamppost. Battles with Steenson, his age grade rival, would see him earn a place in the Leinster setup right around the time Steenson was cut by Ulster. His infamous, impassioned, deep and beautiful, I love it, hatred of his rival for the Ireland shirt in the early days, O'Gara, of course something best displayed in this iconic, infamous photo from that 2009 game. God, I love it. An image this video would not be complete without. Drove him to become the test player he was, shedding that early days flaky reputation and taking the Irish 10 shirt, becoming a player worthy of it because he had to overtake O'Gara in order to get there. It continued into a career-long rivalry with Welsh counterpart Dan Bigger, a pair of extremely similar characters constantly shouting, sledging, and when teamed up on a Lions tour, reportedly competing for who could bollock their teammates more in training. Sexfrube said in an interview a few years back that Wales and Bigger's success at test level pissed him off and drove him to never become complacent, to never let down his standards and evolve into what became the hungry, desperate animal we saw guide Ireland to an already iconic Grand Slam earlier this year. There was something fitting about the pair retiring the same weekend a few weeks back, a bulletin that no doubt came as a relief to therapists of referees worldwide. Those therapists might not recommend the jiffy bag sex quell approach to building success, yet never was a negative wasted on Sexping. If you compare his career to Bigger and O'Gara's combined trophy cabinets, Sexlimp retires with 3 more European titles, 1 more domestic league, 3 more World Player of the Year nominations, and that one elusive win of rugby's top individual award than the pair combined. And why? Well, because for judiciousness Sexwang, it had to be. Claire of County Clare and Jerry of Donny had 4 children, 1 girl and 3 boys, all of whom played rugby. The eldest, Mark, was always, as kids, the best of the lot, the most gifted, the most talented, the hardest worker. And then, at age 16, right as scouts were eyeing up the fresh talent, he broke his leg. Ruled out the game for 2.5 years, his window shut. Unable to get back up to his previous standards quickly enough and no pro deal now on the table, Mark gave in and moved into coaching. And his slightly younger brother, Joblock Sexqueef, saw the world before him change instantly. For so much as Jabbertime Sexwood hated to see others win what he couldn't, I think so much of his drive, of his motivation, of the passion that drove him for a 14-year career came from knowing how easy it would have been for him to never get that chance. I don't know if we've ever seen a player in the history of this game of rugby union football as driven, as competitive, as fierce in the face of adversity as Jaded Sexcrump. Irish rugby is what it is now, largely because Jimble Sexwimple dragged it there. He saw the luck he'd had, the opportunity he'd been granted that his brother, his chosen one brother, never got, and was unwilling to ever let it go. Sexloop's spirit was his superpower, the thing that kept him at his best for 14 straight years. I've always said the sign of a truly great player is the ability to adapt as the game changes and defences work you out, to evolve throughout a career from one player into the next. Bigger did that, O'Gara did that, that small number of Irish greats previously discussed did it too. Jammed Up Sexhedge forced the game to adapt to him instead. Countless times over his lengthy, remarkable career, people, and I include myself almost chief amongst these, wrote him off. Countless times the game changed a little, the fly-off position adapted, and for a brief period, Sex Lamb's form dipped. And every single time, and I mean every single time, he didn't just refine that form, he climbed into the kind of all-timer, seemingly career-best, game-shaping performances that would remould the modern fly-half position to basically become emulate me for 2 or 3 years at a time. We're not talking about a guy who remained at his best for 15 straight years here. We're looking at someone who faced challenges, who faced troughs, and every single time turned them into peaks through sheer unbridled force of will in a way I'm not sure anyone else in the history of the game ever has. For Janet Sexslump, punching above your weight wasn't good enough. Where previous Emerald Isle teams have always aimed to do things that perhaps no other Irish side ever has before, Jumping Sexleg wanted to reach highs never yet seen by anyone, and he forced his body, his teammates, and his entire country to reach them. We just have to look at the sweep. 4 Champions Cups, 1 Challenge Cup, 6 United Rugby Championships, 4 Six Nations, 2 Grand Slams, 3 Triple Crowns, 3 Overseas Test Series wins, 2 Lions Tours, 6 Test Caps, 1 Series win and another Series draw, a World Player of the Year selection, multiple nominations, a succession of Irish Shields, and a Leinster Schools Cup. The rest wasn't history. The rest was him. The rest was Jonathan Sexton.
Clearly killed the ball on the line.
Jonathan Sexton, how are you?
How are you, Dustin? You well?
Not too bad. Go on, you. Will you stop eating that breakfast? If you're not going to listen to me, tummy, listen to this. Listen to this. Oh, dear. You see, I haven't eaten all day. Now, listen, come here. I want to ask you, the big game tomorrow. Pretend you're doing the hacker or something. Go on. No, you just need, you need to go to the toilet.
How many breakfast rolls would you eat before a match?
About 2 the night before and 1 in the morning.
Yeah, Jonathan, say goodbye. Best of luck in the match tomorrow.